Thank you so much, Sally. It's an absolute pleasure to be here and to join you today. Can I start by saying, look, I'm not going to insult your intelligence by endlessly talking about reform today or talking about a general election that's going to be probably 4 years away from now. I'm going to spend my time talking not up reform, but talking up Scotland, because the election in 6 months' time matters. Because if you care about Scotland's hospitals, if you care about Scotland's schools, if you care about Scotland's communities, if you care about Scotland's housing policy, if you care about tackling so many of the everyday challenges in Scotland, then who our government is and what that government chooses to do in Scotland absolutely matters. So that's going to be the focus of my presentation today, because we have got huge challenges. Challenges facing, of course, our politicians, challenges facing our businesses, challenges facing our communities right across the country. And I want to pay tribute, actually, to the IPPR, who have been in Scotland now for a decade, for helping to lead some of that thought process about how we build a fairer, more prosperous and more just Scotland. And so many people in this room I recognise too from many of those policy conversations as we build our own programme leading into the election next year. And let's be really clear, new thinking, new ideas and new analysis is absolutely needed in Scotland. We are past the stage of tinkering and we're past the stage of sticky plaster solutions. We need big, bold, radical thinking and big, bold, radical change come the election and the aftermath of that election next year. And so Scotland does have a choice, who it chooses to elect to hold power in Scotland, what they choose to be the ideas at the heart of that government in Scotland, and what vision they choose for the Scotland of the future. So the importance of that election cannot be understated for our public services, for our economy, and also for parts of our society, all of which in many ways feels under huge strain and in turmoil. And just to think about some of those big challenges we face, 1 in 6 Scots on an NHS waiting list, thousands of people forced to borrow money or remortgage their homes in order to access private care because the NHS free and available at the point of need is only a distant hope for too many. Our schools in the grip of rising violence and poor attendance, and many of our schools being outperformed by international comparators. Our further education system facing an existential crisis. In the midst of a housing emergency where we have right now 10,000 homeless children in Scotland. Our prisons at breaking point and violent crime on the rise, and too many Scottish workers missing out on employment opportunities because those contracts or those jobs go overseas. That's the big challenges facing Scotland's politicians, and that's the big challenges that we don't have to just talk about, but we have to have solutions to if we are to build that fairer and more prosperous Scotland. And I'm sure we'll cover some of those issues in the Q&A too. But I'm going to be here to discuss Scottish Labour's plans as we try to meet those challenges. So we will go into that election, some of which I'll present today, a plan to fix our NHS, a plan to restore our Scottish education system, a plan to unlock the opportunities for people right across the country, and a plan to allow the next generation of Scots to flourish. And it will be rooted in our progressive ideals, in our belief in social mobility, and our belief in fairness. Because that's the story fundamentally of the Labour movement and the Labour Party over many, many decades. And that's the big challenge that faces us as we head towards that election in 6 months' time. So to focus on a couple of areas in particular, if you think about the biggest social policy challenge facing our country post-2026, it is the future of our National Health Service. So I'm not going to rehash the challenges the service faces. That's before our very eyes, with far too many people waiting on far too long NHS waiting lists. But we have to build an NHS that's fit for the future. And that requires us thinking about how it's designed, how it operates, the systems it uses, but also how we refocus away from it being a national sickness service to also being a national health service where we focus on prevention. So what are the principles that will underpin our approach? It will be to declare a national waiting times emergency so we can clear the backlogs. It will be to cut back on bureaucracy, so we're empowering the doctor, the nurse, and spending the money on the treatments rather than on bureaucracy that can, for too many places, hold people back. It's to embrace AI and technology so we can actually bring our NHS into modern times, not the continuing reliance, for example, on fax machines, which we still use in our NHS in Scotland. My kids don't even know what a fax machine is, but we still use it in our archaic system here. It means proper workforce planning, something that's not happened for well over a decade here in Scotland. And it's about making sure we're targeting the resources in the right way, as I say, so we can prioritise prevention. And if we think about, I noticed from the comments earlier on, that quite often the debate about the National Health Service becomes about money and staff, both of which are fundamentally important, but how we maximise the outcomes from the money we put into the National Health Service and how we empower our staff to maximise output from the National Health Service is far too often a forgotten about topic. And if we think back to pre-COVID levels, we have more money in the NHS than ever before. We have more staff in the NHS than ever before, but we are still delivering 40,000 fewer operations compared to pre-pandemic levels. That demonstrates that there is a broader issue around the structure and the productivity of our National Health Service that must be confronted. So I've said a bit about the principles. Let me just pick up on a couple of specifics within those principles. If you think about our large bureaucracy in our NHS, we have 50 boards, whether that be the 14 territorial boards, whether it be the specialist boards, whether it be the integrated joint boards. Are we honestly saying for a population of 5.5 million people, we need 50 boards, 50 chief execs, all that bureaucracy, layer after layer of management, or can we strip that back in a country the size of Scotland to make sure we're focusing that money instead and that resource instead on the doctors, the nurses, and maximising the treatments? I think that is a fundamentally important principle. And what we mean by declaring a national waiting times emergency, again, looks at that bureaucracy holding Scotland back. Right now, we have a system where if capacity exists in another part of the country, so often a patient is not able to access that capacity because the money stays within a health board area, meaning that a patient has to wait longer. Sometimes in some parts of the country having to wait years, when in other parts of the country that same treatment is available in weeks. So we want to fundamentally change that system so the money follows the patient and people are able to access the care they need as quickly as they need it. That's just a couple of examples of how we are talking about those fundamental underlying principles within our National Health Service. So how do we decentralise? How do we make sure that we are cutting back on bureaucracy? How do we make sure we're unlocking the huge potential that exists if we embrace the AI and technology of the future, and making sure we're actually supporting our workforce with the resources they need, with proper planning, rather than just looking for those sticky plaster solutions? That will be the key pillar of our social policy offer as we head into the election next year. But all of you will know that you can only challenge the social injustices that exist in our society if you have it backed up with strong economic policy and a strong, growing economy. And I think for too long in Scottish politics, since the conception actually of the Scottish Parliament, we have been economic policy light, and social policy has been the only focus rather than actually looking at the economic levers that exist in Scotland. I actually think for far too many politicians, it's too easy for them to pretend that all the economic levers exist at Westminster and therefore there aren't different choices we can make here in Scotland. We have economic levers in Scotland. Tax has already been mentioned, our rate system, our planning system, our development agencies, transport, and then two areas that I want to specifically focus on are skills system and regional economic development. And our skills system, if we're honest, is also stuck in the past rather than actually embracing the challenges of the future. We have a skills system that is not fit for purpose, is not delivering for our young people, is not delivering the lifelong learning it needs given the changing world of work, and it's not supporting our businesses, and it's a broken funding model too that is penalising our college sector when the vast majority of people, particularly from working class backgrounds, for them the pathway to good employment, the pathway to university quite often is through our colleges. And we aren't thinking about the jobs of the future, AI, digital, in terms of what we teach in our schools and our high schools either. And that's why we've published a skills green paper setting out the changes a Scottish Labour government will make to transform Scotland's skills landscape and to connect it to wider economic and industrial strategy. So we can unlock the full potential of every young Scot, which will be at the heart of our programme for government. And we want to equip them to find the good jobs, build successful careers, and create new businesses in Scotland's modern economy. And let me just say a bit about building new businesses. I think there are two cultural fundamental challenges that exist in our education system and skill system in Scotland that we have to break. The one is the idea we give to our children that the best that they can ever aspire to be is to grow up and work for someone, rather than actually build a business themselves. How do we bring entrepreneurship into our skills and our education system? And the second cultural problem I think we have to confront is the idea that university is the golden pathway or the only one right choice. We have to end that culture that kind of feels like university is the premiership, that colleges are the championship, that the apprenticeships are the lower leagues, and going straight into work is like the Conference League. I apologise to those that aren't football fans that understand the football references. I want to build a parity that exists that says to every young person there is no one right path, but also you can get a first chance in Scotland, but also a second and third chance in Scotland too, as we reshape our skill system to make it fit for purpose, and how it matches up with a modern industrial strategy for Scotland, something we've not had for almost 2 decades. And the second part, which is I want to focus on around our economic policy, is how we regionalise our economy rather than thinking about Scotland as one monolithic block. This idea that one solution for Edinburgh is going to be the right solution for the Highlands or the Islands, or the one solution for Glasgow is also going to be the right solution for the south of Scotland or the southwest of Scotland. We have to break that Edinburgh knows best mentality, and we have to empower our regions. And we have some huge opportunities in that. So we will develop an economic strategy that looks to empower the regions to allow them to flourish. That's why I've commissioned a piece of work by Professor Sir Anton Muscatelli to examine how Scotland's economic potential can be delivered through stronger regional economic development and growth. And Professor Muscatelli will be publishing those findings in the next few weeks, and I look forward to sharing that with colleagues as, again, we build that economic policy platform for the election next year. So how do we push power and resource out from Holyrood and to the regions of Scotland? That's partly how we do proper planning reform. It's partly how we do partnership between local authorities. It's about how we give a fair funding settlement to local government, but more than just a fair funding settlement for local government. It's about how we give regions the ability to own shares in the assets that come particularly from our energy future in different parts, which in itself can also be a revenue-raising measure that can drive that economic development in those regions, but also how we learn from other parts of the UK where they have, for example, the Metro Mayor system that exists very effectively. Can we look at a similar system here? That's why we will pass a Local Democracy Act that will guarantee fair funding for local government, but will also give power to local communities and to regions to directly elect mayors for their communities if that's what they believe is the right thing for them. So democracy in every part of the country, economic development and regeneration for every part of the country, and not just talking about a stronger Scotland, but delivering a stronger Glasgow, a stronger Edinburgh, a stronger Highlands, stronger Islands, and a stronger south of Scotland. All part of a plan to deliver a healthier Scotland that's fit for the future and that gives opportunities to our young people. All part of a Scotland that backs Scotland's brilliant entrepreneurship, backs Scotland's brilliant businesses, and makes sure every community has the opportunity to flourish. That's what Scottish Labour is offering. That will be the key part of our plan for change. And there are many dividing lines now for next year's election. Next year's election is not just a dividing line on who's going to stand up to reform or who's going to talk about Scotland more strongly. The clear dividing lines are who's going to fix the NHS or carry on the same mess, who's going to deliver those new opportunities for Scotland's young people rather than those that want to continue to see Scotland's schools fall down the international league tables, who's going to confront the huge opportunities that exist in the clean energy of the future. That's why we will end the ideological block against new nuclear energy in Scotland so we can unlock billions of pounds of investment and thousands of new jobs. How do we reform our planning system so we can usher a new wave of house building in Scotland and end rough sleeping once and for all? How we can make people feel safe both to teach and to learn in our classrooms by banning mobile phones, and how we can be serious about confronting the big structural challenges facing Scotland. That's how we challenge the reactionary forces of the far right. We have a serious government, serious about doing the job and improving lives for people here in Scotland. That's the antidote to the politics of the right. That's how we end the tired stare politics that has pushed people to despair in too many parts of the country. And let me just say in closing, before we open up for questions, is I am standing in next year's election because I'm absolutely determined to win. This is not an election next year that's a protest. I think we should have more respect for Scotland's Parliament and Scotland's government than that. Our Parliament's not about protest. Our government's not about protest. It has to be about building a truly better future for every part of our country, and it has to be about delivering bold, transformative change here in Scotland. That's the platform I'll be standing on, and that's the platform I intend to win next year's election on. Thank you so much.
Yes, thanks very much. If you wouldn't mind taking a seat there. Thank you very much indeed, and we will go to you for your questions now. I mean, just a quick one from me. You were talking about the need for big, bold, radical thinking, and you outlined a few of these. Right now, whether it's a protest or not, you are trailing both the SNP and Reform UK by quite a long way in the polls. Is that your fault for not igniting the imagination of the country with a big, bold, radical vision? Or is it Keir Starmer's fault for messing up down south?
There's two answers to that, parts of the answer to that question, Sally. The first is that I have been told by polls, pollsters, commentators, pundits that I'm massively behind, that Scottish Labour is going to lose. I was told that before the general election. We won, and we won a clear majority. I was told it before the Hamilton, Larkhall and Stonehouse by-election that we were going to come third. We won it, and I'm being told it now. And I'm telling you now, I'm going to prove them all wrong. We are going to win next year. And the reason why I'm confident we're going to win next year is right now, I don't think people's focus, the broader public's focus, is actually on the choice that faces them in May 2026. And I think once that choice becomes clear, and that different future for Scotland becomes clear, I am absolutely confident that we will have the right platform and the right message to win that election.
Why do you think so many people are telling pollsters that they will vote for parties other than yours?
So there is undoubtedly a scunner factor across the country, and I can understand people's frustration, understand their anger in many ways, share their frustration and anger. And I think it's easier when you don't have the choice to make, when you actually get into the polling booth and cross a box, to say that it's easier to say you're going to cross the, what I would call the FU button. But actually when people go to the polls and they actually make a choice and have to decide what to do and what the impact that has on their broader family, I think they make different choices. That was proven by what happened in the general election. That was proven what happened in the Hamilton, Larkhall and Stonehouse by-election. I'm confident that's what will happen next year, because fundamentally the choice is Reform can't win. They can create the noise and it can help the SNP win. The choice that people have next year is a third decade of the SNP with John Swinney in charge, or a new direction for Scotland with a Scottish Labour government and me as First Minister. That's the stark choice that people are going to face, and I'm confident in that battle that we'll win that argument and win that election.
Okay, thank you. Could we have a question from the floor? Yes, a lady up the back there. And then we'll go over there. And then we'll go there.
Hi, Gillian McCallum from Scottish Cities Alliance. I'm interested in how you will grow the economy with a declining birth rate this year and an ageing population, and obviously what is Labour's policy on migration in Scotland?
Thank you.
Thank you.
Just take them one by one, Sally, or?
Yes.
So you're right to say that our birth rate is declining. That gives us challenging demographics, and two other things within that demographic challenge is we have a higher level of economic inactivity amongst our young people compared to other parts of the UK. So it's closer to 1 in 6 young people in Scotland that are economically inactive. We have an ageing population that gives us huge challenges around social care in the future of our National Health Service and our social care system, all of which requires fundamental reform if we are to make it fit for the future, but also how you underpin that with economic growth. But let me answer the point directly on migration, and I'll come back to plans for delivering stronger growth here in Scotland. It is right to say that migration has had a massively positive influence on Scotland and the UK. Some would argue I'm the product of it, some would say I'm a negative consequence of it, but it is clear. But we also have a broken immigration system that we have to fix. And a good example of that is people often say to me that you talk about fixing a broken immigration system, you talk about the need to bring down net migration, but how is that consistent with your own family's history, your own family's story? When my grandfather came here in the 1940s, net migration the year he arrived was around plus 25 to 30,000. Net migration in the poorest year under the Conservative government was 1 million. So I don't think you can compare the challenges that faced our nation in the 1940s and what was happening in terms of net migration then to what's happening with net migration now. And if we are going to fix the demographic time bomb that we have here in Scotland and the wider UK, if we are going to have a immigration system that works, we have to look at multiple different walls of how we build that strong house. One part is an immigration system that works. That does mean clearing the backlogs. It does mean reducing the net migration, but it does mean a focus more on skilled migration rather than some of the other challenges. Secondly, we have to match our skill system with our immigration system, because right now that's not the case. There are so many roles. Take our shipbuilding industry as a good example, where we are developing high-paid, well-skilled jobs, but too many of those roles right now we're having to fill with short-term contractors that come from other parts of the world because we're not upskilling enough of our young kids to take up those skills and those jobs. The average salaries could be anywhere between 40 to 60,000 pounds in many of these roles in our shipbuilding industry. How do we have a skill system that match? Third, how do we answer the challenge around rising issues around welfare spend and people's concerns about that? And how do you have a housing system that works so you are building enough homes so you don't have reactionary politicians like Reform and sadly other politicians in certain councils across the country that want to use migrants as an excuse for the fact that we're not building enough homes and therefore we have a housing emergency here in Scotland. So we have to get all four of those walls built together. But do we need to have a migration system that works for Scotland? Yes. I don't think you do that by having a separate Home Office or a separate border agency. I think you do it by having one single UK immigration system, but you have a system that works for every part of the country. We've demonstrated that can happen before, and I'm confident we can demonstrate that can happen into the future. I realise I'm giving really wrong answers, Sally, I'm sorry.
No, it's okay. I'm just thinking that rather than go on to the next part of that question, I think we'll give
Sally.
somebody else a bash, if that's all right. But thank you very much for that. Yes, over there. Have we got the microphone? Lady in green. And we'll go straight after to Lady in pink there as well. So,
thank you very much. Amy Dalrymple from Marie Curie, but I'm not going to ask directly about dying and death. It's conference week. There was a big health conference. Jackie Bailey was there all day on Monday. Voluntary Health Scotland conference yesterday, and this excellent gig today. And the themes of trust have been prevalent in all three sets of discussions, and the themes of long-termism and the questions around consensus and how people work together. Would you agree, Anas, around those conversations about the need to build trust, restore trust, some would say, and about the need for long-termism, and how does that square with the pitch that you made in your speech?
Thank you, and we'll take your question as well.
Thanks very much. Andrea Bradley from EIS. Anna, so I was really pleased to hear some of the emphasis that you put upon education and the role of education in building a better Scotland for the future. You focus very much, though, on the kind of economic rationale that would underpin that, and I'm interested to hear what your thoughts are in respect of the individual and collective well-being outcomes that are derived from a quality education service, and also critically, given what we've been talking about today, the real importance of education at all stages, from early years all the way through to higher education, in defending our democracy and promoting democratic citizenship and participation in such.
Okay, thank you very much.
Two great questions.
Yes, start with restoring trust.
First of all, wholeheartedly agree with you, Amy. And let me just put it this way. I think it's safe to say that if it ever was, but certainly isn't now, politics isn't exactly the kind of life choice you make if you are just in it for the buzz and the thrills. Right? I wouldn't be doing this, and I wouldn't be putting myself forward to be First Minister next year if I wasn't absolutely determined to do it for a purpose. And if that purpose is not to make our country a better place, if that purpose is not to confront the huge challenges facing our country, then to be honest, what's the point of doing it? And so that's why I absolutely recognise that we have to rebuild trust, because trust is fundamentally broken in all our democratic institutions, but also particularly with political parties. We do have to find long-term solutions. That's why I don't think we can afford to just tinker or to just have sticky plasters. We do have to think about big, bold, fundamental change. But let me make one political point also within that as well, Amy, is I look at the two most powerful politicians we've had in Scotland in the last 20 years, and that has been Nicola Sturgeon and Alex Salmond. I disagree with them fundamentally on lots of issues, but no one can disagree they were able politicians and that they didn't have huge mandates to do big things in our country. And I think on reflection, the biggest disappointment of those two big politicians is they used their huge mandate and their undoubted political skills to actually do other debates and other arguments, whether it be about the Constitution or to tinker, rather than to deliver that big, bold, fundamental change. And I think what I want to do differently is, if we do get the privilege of being in government, is to use, hopefully, political skills and principles and values to take on those big challenges and to confront some of the big arguments facing our country. And I think there's an appetite for that now in the country as well, to be honest. I think people are looking past politicians that just say, here's a target, or here's a big policy here, and then the implementation gap is completely falls apart when it gets to that stage and it hits reality. People are seeing past the press release now. And so therefore I am determined to rebuild that trust. I am determined to get our Parliament back to a place where we come together to deliver for people, rather than using it as a way to pick fights with each other and just build on an us versus them politics.
And a quick thought on education?
And on education, my wife says I give too long answers as well, so I'm sorry, Sally. On education, Andrea, great question, because yes, there is an economic imperative for us to fix our skill system to make sure it can drive the future Scottish economy and therefore the fruits of that growth to deliver our public services. But if we're honest with ourselves, it also has to be about empowering our young people, but not just our young people, actually through lifelong learning, people with the life skills they need. And where is the role for financial planning, financial literacy, democratic literacy, and digital literacy that is part of people's fundamental life skills that they require now, not just the skills they need for the world of work. And I think if we can build that kind of skills and education system, it would have Scotland in a much, much stronger place.
Anna, thank you very much. I'm sorry to have hurried you on. It's just it's lunchtime. But ladies and gentlemen,
I'm hungry too. I'm hungry too.
Give him a clap.
Thank you.